Good evening. Welcome to day 28 of Reading Challenge. Chapter 12. In the early days after his return from Moscow, whenever Levin shuddered and grew red, remembering the disgrace of his rejection, he said to himself, "This was just how I used to shudder and blush, thinking myself utterly lost. When I was plucked in physics and did not get my remove, and how I thought myself utterly ruined after I had mismanaged that affair of my sister's that was entrusted to me. And yet, now that years have passed, I recall it and wonder that it could distress me so much. It will be the same thing too with this trouble. Time will go by and I shall not mind about this either." But 3 months had passed and he had not left off minding about it, and it was as painful for him to think of it as it had been those first days. He could not be at peace because after dreaming so long of family life and feeling himself so ripe for it, but he was still not married and was further than ever from marriage. He was painfully conscious himself, as were all about him, that at his years it is not well for man to be alone. He remembered how before starting for Moscow he had once said to his cowman Nikolai, a simple hearted peasant whom I liked talking to, "Well, Nikolai, I mean to get married," and how Nikolai had promptly answered as of a matter on which there could be no possible doubt, and high time too. Konstantin Dmitrievich, but marriage had now become further off than ever. The place was taken, and whenever he tried to imagine any of the girls he knew in that place, he felt that it was utterly impossible. Moreover, the recollection of the rejection and the part he had played in the affair tortured him with shame. However, often he told himself that he was in no wise to blame in it. That recollection, like other humiliating reminiscences of a similar kind, made him twinge and blush. There had been in his past, as in every man's actions, recognized by him as bad, for which his own conscience ought to have tormented him. But the memory of these evil actions was far from causing him so much suffering as those trivial but humiliating reminiscences. These wounds never healed, and with these memories was now ranged his rejection and the pitiful position in which he must have appeared to others that evening. But time and work did their part. Bitter memories were more and more covered up by the incidents, paltry in his eyes, but really important of his country life. Every week he thought less often of Kitty. He was impatiently looking forward to the news that she was married, or just going to be married, hoping that such news would, like having a tooth out, completely cure him. Meanwhile, spring came on, beautiful and kindly, without the delays and treacheries of spring, one of those rare springs in which plants, beasts, and man rejoice alike. This lovely spring roused Levin still more and strengthened him in his resolution of renouncing all his past and building up his lonely life firmly and independently. Though many of the plans with which he had returned to the country had not been carried out, still his most important resolution, that of purity, had been kept by him. He was free from that shame which had usually harassed him after a fall, and he could look everyone straight in the face. In February, he had received a letter from Maria Nikolaevna telling him that his brother Nikola's health was getting worse, but that he would not take advice, and in consequence of this letter, Levin went to Moscow to his brother's and succeeded in persuading him to see a doctor and to go to a watering place abroad. He succeeded so well in persuading his brother and in lending him money for the journey without irritating him that he was satisfied with himself in that matter. In addition to his farming, which called for special attention in spring, and in addition to reading, Levin had begun that winter a work on agriculture, the plan of which turned on taking into account the character of the laborer on the lands as one of the unalterable data of the question, like the climate and the soil, and consequently deducing all the principles of scientific culture, and not simply from the data of soil and climate, but from the data of soil, climate, and a certain unalterable characters of the laborer. Thus, in spite of his solitude, or in consequence of his solitude, his life was exceedingly full. Only rarely he suffered from an unsatisfied desire to communicate his stray ideas to someone besides Agafya Mihalovna. With her, indeed, he not infrequently fell into discussion upon physics. the theory of agriculture, and especially philosophy. Philosophy was Agafi Milahovna's favorite subject. Spring was slow in unfolding. For the last few weeks, it had been steadily fine frosty winter. In the daytime, it thawed in the sun, but at night there were even 7 degrees of frost. There was such a frozen surface on the snow that they drove the wagons anywhere off the roads. Easter came in the snow. Then all of a sudden, on Easter Monday, a warm wind sprang up. Storm clouds swooped down. And for 3 days and 3 nights, the warm, driving rain fell in streams. On Thursday, the wind dropped, and a thick grey fog brooded over the land as though hiding the mysteries of the transformation that were being wrought in nature. Behind the fog, there was the flowing of water, the cracking and floating of ice, the swift rush of turbid, forming torrents. And on the following Monday, in the evening, the fog parted. The storm clouds split up into little curling crusts of cloud. The sky cleared, and the real spring had come. In the morning, the sun rose brilliant and quickly wore away the thin layer of ice that covered the water, and all the warm air was quivering with a steam that rose up for the quickened earth. The old grass looked greener, and the young grass thrust up its tiny blades. The buds of the guelder rose and of the currant and the sticky birch buds were laden with sap, and an exploring bee was humming about the golden blossoms that studded with willow. Larks trilled unseen above the velvety green fields and the ice-covered stubble land. Peewits wailed over the low lands and marshes flooded by the pools. Cranes and wild geese flew high across the sky uttering their spring calls. The cattle bawled in patches where the new hair had not grown yet. Loud in the pastures, the bow-legged lambs frisked around their bleating mothers. Nimble children ran about the drying paths, covered with the prints of bare feet. There was a merry chatter of peasant women over their linen at the pond, and the ring of axes in the yard where the peasants were repairing ploughs and harrows. The real spring had come. Chapter 13. Levin put on his big boots, and for the first time a cloth jacket instead of his fur cloak, and went out to look after his farm, stepping over streams of water that flashed in the sunshine and dazzled his eyes, and treading 1 minute on ice and the next into sticky mud. Spring is the time of plans and projects, and as he came out into the farmyard, living like a tree in spring that knows not what form will be taken by the young shoots and twigs imprisoned in its swelling buds, hardly knew what undertaking he was going to begin upon now. He was going to begin upon now in the farm work that was so dear to him. But he felt that he was full of the most splendid plans and projects. First of all, he went to the cattle. The cows had been let out into their paddock, and their smooth sides were already shining with their new, sleek spring coats. They basked in the sunshine and loved to go to the meadow. Levin gazed admiringly at the cows he knew so intimately to the minutest detail of their condition, and gave orders for them to be driven out into the meadow, and the calves to be let into the paddock. The headsman ran gaily to get ready for the meadow. The cowherd girls, picking up their petticoats, ran splashing through the mud with bare legs, still white, not yet brown from the sun, weaving brushwoods in their hand, chasing the calves that frolicked in the mirth of spring. After admiring the young ones of that year, who were particularly fine, the early calves were the size of a peasant's cow, and Pawa's daughter, at 3 months old, was as big as a yearling. Levin gave orders for a trough, trough to be brought out and for them to be fed in the paddock. But it appeared that as the paddock had not been used during the winter, the hurdles made in the autumn for it were broken. He sent for the carpenter, who according to his orders ought to have been at work at the thrashing machine. But it appeared that the carpenter was repairing the harrows, which ought to have been repaired before Lent. This was very annoying to Levin. It was annoying to come upon that everlasting slovenliness in the farm work against which he had been striving with all his might for so many years. The hurdles, as he ascertained, being not wanted in winter, had been carried out to the cart horse's stable, and there broken, as they were of light construction only meant for feeding calves. Moreover, it was apparent also that the harrows and all the agricultural implements which he had directed to be looked over and repaired in the winter, for which very purpose he had hired three carpenters, had not been put into repair, and the harrows were being repaired when they ought to have been harrowing the field. Levin sent for his bailiff, but immediately went off himself to look for him. The bailiff, beaming all over like everyone that day in a sheepskin bordered with a astrakhan, came out of the bar, twisting a bit of straw in his hand. Why isn't the carpenter at the thrashing machine? Oh, I meant to tell you yesterday. The harrows weren't repairing. Here it's time they got to work in the fields. But what were they doing in the winter then? But what did you want the carpenter for? Where are the hurdles for the cows? Paddock. I ordered them to be got ready. What would you have with those peasants? Said the bailiff with a wave of his hand. It's not those peasants but this bailiff, said Levin, getting angry. Why what do I keep for why what do I keep you for? He cried. But bethinking himself that this would not help matters, he stopped short in the middle of a sentence and merely sighed. Well, what do you say? Can sowing begin? He asked after a pause. Behind Turkin tomorrow or the next day, they might begin. And the clover? I've sent Vasily and Mishka, they are sowing. Only I don't know if they'll manage to get through. It's so slushy. How many acres? About 50. Why not sow all? Cried Levin. That they were only sowing the clover on 15 acres, not on all the 45, was still more annoying to him. Clover, as he knew both from books and from his own experience, never did well except when it was sown as early as possible, almost in the snow. And yet, Levin could never get this done. There's no one to send. What would you have with such a set of peasants? Three haven't turned up, and there's Semyon. Well, you should have taken some men from the thatching. And so I have, as it is. Where are the peasants then? Five are making compete. uh, Five are making compost, which meant compost. Four are shifting the oats for fear of a touch of mildew. Konstantin Dmitrievich. Levin knew very well that a touch of mildew meant that his English seed odds were already ruined. Again, they had not done as he had ordered. Why, but I told you during Lent to put in pipes, he cried. Don't put yourself out. We shall get it all done in time. Levin waved his hand angrily, went into the granary to glance at the oats, and then to the stable. The oats were not yet spoiled, but the peasants were carrying the oats in spades when they might simply let them slide down into the lower granary, and arranging for this to be done, and taking two workmen from there for sowing clover. Levin got over his vexation with the bailiff. Indeed, it was such a lovely day that one could not be angry. Ignat, he called to the coachman, who with his sleeves tucked up was washing the carriage wheels. Saddle me. Which, sir? Well, let it be Kolpik. Yes, sir. While they were saddling his horse, Levin again called up the bailiff, who was hanging about inside, to make it up with him, and began talking to him about the spring operations before them and his plans for the farm. The wagons were to begin carting manure earlier, so as to get all done before the early mowing, and the ploughing of the further land to go on without a break, so as to let it ripen lying fallow, and the mowing to be all done by hired labor, not on half profits. The bailiff listened attentively and obviously made an effort to approve of his employer's projects. But still he had that look Levin knew so well that always irritated him. So look of hopelessness and despondency. That look, sir, that's all very well, but as good wills. Nothing mortified Levin so much as that tone, but it was the tone common to all the bailiffs he had ever had. They had all taken up that attitude to his plans, and so now he was not angered by it, but mortified it, and felt all the more roused to struggle against this, as it seemed elemental force continually raged against him, for which he could find no other expression than as God wills. If he can manage it, Konstantin Dmitrievich, said the bailiff. Why ever shouldn't you manage it? We positively must have another 15 laborers, and they don't turn up. There were some here today asking 70 rubles for the summer. Levin was silent. Again he was brought face to face with that opposing force. He knew that however much they tried, they could not hire more than 40, 37, perhaps 38 laborers for a reasonable sum. Some 40 had been taken on, and there were no more, but still he could not help struggling against it. Send to Suri. If they don't come, we must look for them. Oh, I'll send. To be sure, said Vasily Fedorovitch respondedly. But there are the horses too. They are not good for much. We'll get some more. I know, of course, Levin added, laughing. You always want to do with as little as poor and as poor quality as possible. But this year, I'm not going to let you have things your own way. I'll see to everything myself. Why, I don't think you take much rest as it is. It cheers us up to work under the master's eye. So they are sowing clover behind the bush rail. I'll go and have a look at them, he said, getting on to the little bay cock called Pick, who was led up by the coachman. You can't get across the streams, Konstantin Dmitrievich, the coachman shouted. All right, I'll go by the forest. And Levin rode through the slush of the farmyard to the gate and out into the open country, his good little horse, after his long inactivity, stepping out gallantly, snorting over the poles and asking, as it were, for guidance. If Levin had felt happy before in the cattle pens and farmyard, he felt happier yet in the open country, swaying rhythmically with the ambling paces of his good little cob, bringing in the warm yet fresh scent of the snow and the air. As he rode through his forest over the crumbling, wasted snow, still left in parts and covered with the dissolving tracks, he rejoiced over every tree with the moss reviving on its bark and the birds swelling on its shoots. When he came out of the forest in the immense plain before him, his grass fields stretched in an unbroken carpet of green, without one bare place or swamp, only spotted here and there in the hollows with patches of melting snow. He was not put out of temper even by the sight of the peasants' horses and colts trampling down his young grass. He told a peasant he met to drive them out, nor by the sarcastic and stupid reply of the peasant I pat, whom he met on the way and asked, I pat, I pat, shall we soon be sowing? We must get the ploughing done first, Konstantin Dmitrievich, answered I pat. The further he rode, the happier he became, and plans for the land rose to his mind each better than the past. To plant all his fields with hedges along the southern borders, so that the snow should not lie under them. To divide them into 6 fields of arable and 3 of pasture and hay. To build a cattle yard at the further end of the estate, and to dig a pond and to construct movable pens for the cattle as a means of manuring the land, and then 800 acres of wheat, 300 of potatoes, and 400 of clover, and not 1 acre exhausted. Absorbed in such dreams, carefully keeping his horse by the hedges, so as not to trample his young corpse, he rode up to the laborers who had been sent to sow clover. A cart with the seed in it was standing not at the edge, but in the middle of the crop, and the winter corn had been torn up by the wheels and trampled by the horse. Both the laborers were sitting in the hedge, probably smoking a pipe together. The earth in the cart with which the seed was mixed was not crushed to powder, but crusted together on adhering in clots. Seeing the master, the laborer easily went towards the cart, while Mishka set to work sowing. This was not as it should be, but with the laborers, Levin seldom lost his temper. When Vasily came up, Levin told him to lead the horse to the hedge. It's all right, sir. It's all spring up again, responded Vasily. Please don't argue, said Levin, but do as you are told. Yes, sir, answered Vasily, and he took the horse's head. What is sowing, Konstantin Dmitrievich, he said, hesitating first rate, only it's a work to get aboard. You drag a ton of earth on your shoes. Why is it you have earth that's not sifted? Said Levin. Well, we crumple it up, answered Vasily, taking up some seed and rolling the earth in his palms. Vasily was not to blame Vasily was not to blame for their having filled up his cart and unsifted earth, but still it was annoying. Levin had more than once already tried a way he knew for stifling his anger and turning all that seemed dark right again, and he tried that way now. He watched how Mishka strode along, swinging the huge clouds of earth that clung to each foot, and getting off his horse, he took the sieve from Vasily and started sewing himself. Where did you stop? Wesley pointed to the mark with his foot, and Levin went forward as best he could, scattering the seed on the land. Walking was as difficult as on a bog, and by the time Levin had ended the row, he was in great heat, and he stopped and gave up the sieve to Wesley. Well, master, when summer's here, mind you don't scold me for these rows, said Wesley. Eh? Said Levin cheerily, already feeling the effect of his method. Why, you will see it in the summertime. It will look different. Look, you where I sowed last spring. How I did work at it. I do my best, Konstantin Dmitrievich, as I would for my own father. I don't like bad work myself, nor would I let another man do it. What's good for the master is good for us too. To look out yonder now, said Wesley, pointing. It does once hurt good. It's a lovely spring, Wesley. Why it's a spring such as the old man don't remember of like that. Remember the like of. I was up home, an old man up there who has own wheat too, about an acre of it. He was saying you couldn't know it from. Have you been sowing wheat long? Why, sir, it was you taught us the year before last. You gave me 2 measures. We sold about 8 bushels and sowed a rood. Well, mind you crumple up the clods, said Levin, going towards his horse, and keep an eye on Mishka. And if there's good crop, you shall have half a ruble for every acre. Humbly thankful. We are very well content, sir, as it is. Levin got on his horse and rode towards the field where was last year's clover and the one which was plucked ready for the spring corn. Thanks for the day. We'll see tomorrow.